Coming up at the end of this month, be sure to catch our two-part special, Canada in the Great War. We focus on the rise of General Sir Arthur Currie.
Arthur Currie was as unlikely a candidate for war hero as ever set foot on a parade ground. Physically unfit and a failure in business before the war, citizen soldier Currie, after having commanded no more than 400 men during peacetime, had risen from relative military obscurity to command of the elite fighting machine on the Western Front, the Canadian Corps.
And we march alongside Canadian forces as they spearhead the last 100 days of World War I.
Unlike many previous battles, there would be no preliminary bombardment until 0 hour, 4:20 a.m. August the 8th. More than 900 guns were set to fire at that moment, followed quickly by the advance of nearly 600 tanks and 1,900 aircraft, and waves of infantry would begin the march of the last 100 days.
Don't miss Canada in the Great War, January 24th and 31st, only on Point of the Spear. Welcome to Hamilton at War, our 12-part weekly podcast series that brings to life in vivid historical and emotional detail Alexander Hamilton's Revolutionary War service. I'm Robert Child, and I hope you enjoy this latest installment.
Hamilton at War, written by Robert Child and narrated by James Gillis. 2 months after Hamilton's wedding, General Washington moved to his new headquarters at New Windsor, New York, where he would base operations until the end of the war. He occupied a 2-story stone farmhouse with a small porch and a long sloping roof overlooking the Hudson River. It was situated just north of the fortress at West Point. On the 2nd floor, Hamilton, bleary-eyed and extremely tired, was just completing an order that needed dispatch. Hamilton rose from his small desk and started down the stairs. He met General Washington coming up. "Colonel, I need to speak with you on these dispatches to Newport." "I will be but a moment," Hamilton said as he continued past Washington, leaving him on the stairs. Hamilton was irritable and overly tired. He needed fresh air. He said to himself as he exited the farmhouse, "That man, he does not give me air to breathe." Just 100 yards from the house, Hamilton reached his fellow aide-de-camp, Tench Tileman, at a small group of tents. "Ham, you look awful." "It's the General. He had me up late into the morning hours composing dispatches to the French. It is a curse that I am among the few fluent in the family." Tench laughed. Hamilton didn't join him. He handed Tench the order. "Could you deliver this order to Commissary Blaine? It's pressing." "Certainly. Why don't you join us at breakfast? Stevens has it nearly ready." "I wish I could," he continued sarcastically. "Duty calls." Hamilton spun around and encountered Lafayette on his way to breakfast. Lafayette said, "Good morning, my friend." Hamilton stopped. "I had just written Madame, preparing her on Colonel Laurent's arrival at Versailles. If I were home, he would stay in our house." Hamilton, impatient and also envious of Lauren's latest adventure, stood fidgeting. Yes. I told her she should introduce him to our most agreeable friends, Madame Diane, the Marshal de Mouchy, the Mercier du Noy." Yes, well, His Excellency awaits. I apologize for my abruptness, but our work from this morning remains unfinished." Hamilton stepped by Lafayette, leaving him standing on the path. Hamilton quickly entered headquarters. He saw Washington pacing on the landing upstairs. Hamilton slowly mounted the stairs. Washington glared down at him, and they came face to face on the landing. "You've kept me waiting at the head of these stairs these 10 minutes. I must tell you, sir, you treat me with disrespect." Hamilton was completely out of patience. "I am not conscious of it, sir, but since you have thought it necessary to tell me so, we must part." "Very well, sir, if that is your choice." Washington stormed back into his office and slammed the door. Hamilton stood stunned a moment, then bolted back down the stairs. The door of the farmhouse flung open and attracted the attention of Lafayette and Tench at breakfast. They turned and saw Hamilton storming down the path to the river. Lafayette put his napkin down and raced to catch up with Hamilton. "What has happened?" Hamilton, beet red, stopped. "I am no longer in the service of that man," he said as he glared back at the farmhouse. "And thank God!" Lafayette stood open-mouthed as Hamilton continued. "He believes I show him disrespect. He disrespects me. He thinks I kept him waiting 10 minutes. 10 minutes! When, as you can attest, our encounter was perhaps less than 1 minute." Lafayette, very concerned, looked back to the headquarters farmhouse. "I will speak with him. I am to blame for your delay. No, do nothing of the sort." Then Hamilton turned back to the house. "He will regret his ill humour when it is plain I shall not return." Hamilton then turned and stormed off, leaving Lafayette in the middle of the path. Tench had watched the whole exchange from the command post. He got up and headed for Washington's headquarters. Hamilton sat on some rocks at the edge of the riverbank, watching the current. A frown remained as he replayed his earlier encounter with Washington in his mind. Tench arrived. "Peaceful spot to clear your thoughts." Hamilton got up and threw a rock into the river. "My thoughts remain clear. I spoke with him. He has sent me in his name to assure you of his confidence in your abilities, integrity, and usefulness. He desires a candid conversation to heal your differences, which could not have happened but in a moment of passion. Tench, the rupture is too great. Without a shadow of neither reason nor the slightest grounds, he charged me with an affront. I am tired of his browbeating. We all suffer his short temper, but he is just as quick to make amends. Not this time. I have taken my resolution strongly, and it is not to be revoked. A conversation would serve no purpose. You must ask that he permit me to decline it. But Ham, I have forsaken my own military ambitions far too long under his thumb. I am determined to leave the family." In General Schuyler's home, Philip Schuyler and Hamilton sat across from each other in the red wing-back chairs. Eliza sat beside Hamilton, holding his hand. The silence was deafening. "There is no impropriety in your conduct, son. For that I am persuaded you are incapable, but you devalue the need for your great abilities in His Excellency's camp." Hamilton said nothing, just shook his head. "You must consider how this will appear. The breach cannot be kept secret, especially from the French." Hamilton got up and started to pace as Schuyler continued. "I know you seek distinction, the glory that comes with accomplishment in the field, but there is no greater glory that would benefit the cause than to remain at his side. Make the sacrifice." Hamilton stopped pacing and turned to his father-in-law. "I had promised myself, if ever a breach should happen between us, that I would never consent to an accommodation. My own ambitions have been restrained these 4 years in his service. I shall not be denied any longer." "Alexander, you forget. He alone has the power to grant you what you so strongly desire." Hamilton looked to Eliza. Washington sat alone in his office at his headquarters in New Windsor, writing. His mood was reflective. Tench entered and dropped additional letters on Washington's desk and left quickly, sensing the general did not want to be disturbed. Washington finally put his quill down and gazed out the side window towards the Hudson. He then looked over to the small table where Hamilton had worked. The table and chair remained vacant. He truly missed his young aide, his sharp intellect, their exchanges, his command of the pen. Perhaps I had become too dependent on him, he thought. 1 month later, on the grass outside the headquarters farmhouse, Tench was meeting with some French officers who had just arrived at camp. On the entry path, on horseback, rode Hamilton. Tench turned, saw him, and smiled, delighted. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Tench said. leaving the French officers and going to greet Hamilton. "Hamilton, it is so good to see you." Hamilton remained on his horse as they shook hands. Washington appeared on the porch of his headquarters. Both Hamilton and Tench turned and saw him. Washington, with only the slightest hint of a smile, nodded to his former aide. Hamilton nodded back amicably. Washington descended the steps and moved towards the French officers. "Commanders, I have so looked forward to your arrival. Come, let us adjourn inside." Hamilton and Tench followed the group with their eyes. "I hesitate to ask, are you rejoining us?" "Eliza and I have rented a small cottage at Epista's Point. Perhaps being closer I can more effectively press my issue." Tench turned and looked at Washington's headquarters and sighed. "Well, I wish you much luck, my friend. He has been rather to himself since your departure." Hamilton, too, now looked to Washington's headquarters with hope in his eyes. "Do you wish me to arrange a conversation?" "Not at the moment. I want to detail my request formally in correspondence first. He will see the logic in my argument." Tench forced a smile. Several days later, Washington sat in his usual position, poring through a stack of paperwork in front of him. Tench entered. "Your Excellency, a letter." Washington did not look up, but motioned to the desk. Yes, just add it to the pile." Tench remained holding the letter. Washington finally looked up, and Tench handed it to him. "It is from Colonel Hamilton." Washington slowly took it. Then Tench slipped out the door. Washington adjusted his spectacles, sat back, and began to read. "Dear Sir, it has become necessary for me to apply to your Excellency to know in what manner you foresee you will be able to employ me in the ensuing campaign. I began in the line, and had I continued there, I ought in justice to have been more advanced in rank than I am now." Washington exhaled a sigh and continued to read. "A corps of light infantry drawn from various regiments, which would march at the head of a column going southward, would supply a suitable command for a man who has sacrificed so much and won such reputation when selflessly serving the cause as your aide." Washington, now red-faced, slammed the letter down. "Colonel Tillman, dictation!" A military courier arrived at Hamilton's cottage at Epista's Point and handed Eliza, who was tending some flowers, a letter. She saw whom it was from and rushed inside. Dear, a letter has come back from Army headquarters." Hamilton emerged from the bedroom, smiling. "See, I told you. The general would not hesitate once I reminded him of my past service." Hamilton tore into the letter and began to read. "Dear Sir, your letter of this date has not a little embarrassed me." Hamilton looked to Eliza. "I must examine this more closely, my dear." He returned to the bedroom and slowly shut the door. The letter continued, "I am convinced that no officer can with justice dispute your merit and abilities, but the officers of the line contend that it is a hardship and reflection upon them to introduce brevet officers into commands of some permanence in which they themselves have prepared for in the field." Hamilton bit his lip. "This refusal of your request, I assure you, is only influenced by the reasons which I have mentioned." Hamilton crumpled the letter and threw it into a corner. Eliza entered, hopeful for her husband. Hamilton showed a brave face. "His Excellency believes my services are not required at the present moment." Elizabeth, not fond of the constant worry about her husband and the dangers of war, was secretly glad, but responded, "Oh dear. Do not be concerned. We will return to Albany. I will continue my petitions from there."
I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thanks for listening. I'm Robert Child. and be with us next week for another exciting installment of Hamilton at War, only on Point of the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.